Okay, so first of all, I just want to say thanks for being here, for being a part of this project. Special thanks to the subject matter experts for coming here and taking time out of their day to impart some of their knowledge on us about the pelvic floor and postpartum fitness. I'm really excited to dive into this topic. It's something that's really important, I think, for us as women in general, and especially as we go through delicate phases of life like pregnancy and postpartum. So to start, I'm just going to read their bios, just in case, just to give you a little refresher of who they are. So first, we've got Laura Bruner with us. She's a certified nutrition consultant and a certified CrossFit trainer. She co-hosts the Modern Mamas podcast, along with many other endeavors in the health and wellness space. She strives to educate and inspire toward intuitive shifts in daily habits and headspace, leading to healthier minds and bodies, increased strength and physical potential, and longevity. Additionally, Laura creates individualized programming for women in all phases and has a special passion for coaching women in the postpartum period. So welcome, Laura. And then
Hi, thank you.
You're welcome. We have Jenny Putt. And Jenny is a licensed pelvic floor physical therapist, certified orthopedic clinical specialist, CrossFit Level 2 trainer, fellow of applied functional science, and a certified massage practitioner. She's also founder of Mom Strong Santa Cruz, which provides evidence-based perinatal functional strength education to trainers, coaches, and fitness professionals with the goal of making all gyms perinatal fitness friendly to better serve mothers of the community. She became passionate about pelvic floor education after noticing many mothers she worked with in her physical therapy practice were suffering from low back, hip, and/or, I might not pronounce this right, sacroiliac pain?
Sacroiliac.
Sacroiliac.
You were close. You were close.
Thank you. And identifying a weak pelvic floor as the culprit. After giving birth herself, her interest in pelvic floor health increased even more. So thank you, Jenny, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So excited. Okay, cool. So just one logistical thing with a group this small, if we don't have anybody else jumping on, feel free to pop in with questions if it's a good time, but if it's not, feel free to type questions in the chat box. And I can always, I'm going to keep track of that. So we'll make sure we try to get everything answered for everybody. And then additionally, Laura and Jenny have offered email correspondence if after the fact you have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask. So I'm going to kick it over to Jenny to start and just talk a little bit about the pelvic floor and what it is and how it functions and how it's affected by pregnancy and life.
Getting a big baby out of there, out of a small hole or out of your abdominals. Okay, so we're just going to start with like what the pelvic floor is, where it is, what it does, and then how it's incorporated in our whole system as part of our core. And then I think that we'll probably refer back to kind of how it functions as we start kind of applying it to functional fitness. So pelvic floor, it is a series of muscles that sits at the bottom of our pelvis. So it's kind of like a hammock. It goes from tailbone to pubic bone and side to side from the sit bones. There's 3 different layers. The first 2 superficial ones have our sphincters in it. So they're really important for our poop and pee control. And then the deepest layer, the often neglected and forgotten one, it's deep and it provides the lift and support to all the organs and when we're pregnant, the baby from above. And so that is where it is and what it looks like. With regards to what it does, again, it helps us not poop or pee ourselves. It also helps kind of stabilize our core, our spine, and we'll kind of talk about that further. But with that, when there's dysfunction there, you can have kind of pubic pain, tailbone pain, hip pain, sacroiliac pain, back pain. All of it can be related to this whole area, and you can kind of see how close it is to our hip. This is our sacroiliac joint here, our tailbone. It's kind of a lumbar spine. It's very, very close, very relevant to all these things. So even if you don't pee yourself, then you still could have pelvic floor dysfunction. It might just kind of come out in a different way, like low back pain. It also, in addition to helping us not poo and pee ourselves, it helps, it provides that lift, that support, so it prevents prolapse, which is a common diagnosis after having a kiddo. And we'll talk kind of more about that, but I think just to give you an idea of what prolapse is, because it's kind of that kind of term that sometimes people are not sure, but they kind of feel like something's coming out of their vagina, or maybe they can see the tissue, they can feel it, it's a feeling of heaviness, or the feeling of having a full tampon in. It's about to fall out when you don't even have a tampon in. So what it is if this is our vaginal opening and our uterus where baby grew up above. You've got the bladder in the front and you have the rectum in the back. So usually this vaginal opening provides a wall of support against the bladder and against the colon. When this tissue gets stretched out, which often happens in pregnancy and delivery, that no longer provides a wall of support. And so your colon or your bladder can kind of push the vaginal tissue into the opening or even out through the vaginal opening so you can actually see it. So it's not your actual bladder coming out, it's kind of the bladder pushing into the vaginal canal. The other thing that can happen is that the uterus that kind of has ligaments from above, they can get overstretched and the uterus can actually sink lower, and it can go all the way to the opening or even out, and you can actually see the cervix right there. So that's prolapse. So the pelvic floor kind of helps provide that lift, kind of helps provide that structural support of the vaginal opening. It can be related to constipation and diarrhea. A lot of the times people think that incontinence means losing your whole bladder. It can be just a little dribble with a cough or a sneeze or jumping. It can also be just having to feel like you have to go pee all the time. So if you feel like you have to go pee and you go and it's this little dribble and you're like, well, that was a waste of time, that is a form of incontinence. It's called urge incontinence. Also the backside, so pooping yourself or not being able to hold a fart in, or that feeling of like, I'm not really sure if this is a poop or a fart kind of feeling. So it's kind of not sure, it's a decreased sensation and inability to really say, can I let this one go or am I gonna have to change my pants? So that's kind of the function of the pelvic floor in isolation. It also allows for penetration, so sex. And the muscles that are in the first layer are around the clitoris as well. And so it provides an orgasm. And so sexual function is a huge thing as well. So it's pretty much poop, pee, sex, and then the organs are kind of pelvic floor in a nutshell. But the bigger thing, and kind of the thing I think we're gonna emphasize a lot today, is how it is the bottom of our core. So the abdominals get all the attention with regards to the core, but they're just the middle. So the middle is the abdominals, the bottom is the pelvic floor, and the top is our diaphragm. And so the spine is stabilized by two things: intra-abdominal pressure and muscle activity. So on our inhale, what happens is the diaphragm, which is a dome at rest, on our inhale, it flattens, and that kind of draws the air into our lungs, and it pushes all of our abdominal contents outward. And that pressure outward, met with some abdominal activity, provides stiffness to the spine and stabilizes on our inhale. And then on our exhale, the diaphragm goes back up to a dome, it pushes the air out of our lungs, and we no longer have that intra-abdominal pressure, so muscle activity is supposed to replace that. And this occurs at the pelvic floor too. On the inhale, the pelvic floor lengthens, and on the exhale, the pelvic floor contracts to help stabilize the spine. Same thing with our abdominals. So between those two things, that is how we really get spinal stability. And that is really what has to be kind of in order to have full function of our pelvic floor. The pelvic floor needs to be able to relax, it needs to be able to contract, and it needs to be coordinated in the whole system of the core, which, as I mentioned, is driven by the diaphragm. So diaphragmatic breath is huge. I'm sure we're gonna dive more into that. So what happens during pregnancy is a few things. One is that the abdominals get stretched out because we gotta make room for the baby somewhere. And I think we'll probably touch on diastasis recti later. But the abdominals get stretched out, they go offline. The brain's like, you are useless, you're super lengthened, we're just not even gonna communicate with you. Go to Hawaii, have a Mai Tai. Then the pelvic floor is under a ton of weight with all the baby and is in this like holding on for dear life state. It also potentially had a baby come through it, maybe had a tear, otherwise the abdominals got cut through and have tear and scar tissue. So that is like on a muscle level, the abdominals and the pelvic floor have been through a lot, regardless of whether it's you had a vaginal or a C-section, the muscles have been through a lot. Now, the diaphragm, you've completely lost your diaphragmatic breath in late stage pregnancy, so like third trimester, because baby kind of pushes all the way up there. So your diaphragm can't go through that nice excursion of dome to flat. It has like barely any movement. And then also our rib cage is flared up to make more room for that baby. And that puts the diaphragm at a weird angle to where you just don't have access to that breath. And so you end up chest breathing because baby's taking the room for everything else. And that completely derails the whole core, period, on like a muscle level, posture level, breath level, just like all of it. And that's why it's really important to consciously rebuild that, because I find that our ribs don't just automatically come down often. We don't automatically refine diaphragmatic breath. And sometimes the brain just, lets the abdominals and the pelvic floor stay in Hawaii. And if we don't consciously get all that back, then we end up down the road, if not immediately, having symptoms like the pain or the prolapse or the peeing yourself or constipation or pain with all the things. So that is it in a nutshell.
Awesome. That was a lot of great information. I know a lot of people don't know even exactly what the pelvic floor is, what it looks like, and what it does. I certainly didn't before I did PT and met with you, so I really appreciate all of that info. Laura, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about postpartum fitness and how you approach it in a way that you can maintain the integrity of the pelvic floor?
Yeah, and it's just, I think obviously this is potentially goes without saying, but I think it's something that cannot be said enough, that every body is so different. So I think a lot of us professionals in this world take a lot of issue with this like 6-week appointment, and all of a sudden your provider says, cool, you're cleared, without any thought around the intention for the unique individual and the pregnancy story, the pre-pregnancy fitness story, pregnancy story, how did labor and delivery pan out, how has postpartum been, and not just, I wish that, I think that's why it's important to have providers outside of just our OB or just our midwife, because they can't do it all. They're specialized in one thing, but I think it takes a team and a lot of intuitive body awareness to know when it's actually time to start going back to fitness. That said, that's kind of in the standard definition of fitness as most people know it, which is like squats, intensity, lifting, endurance, etc. But fitness really, depending on how you see that word, it can start the day you have a baby. And you never actually have to stop. If we actually take into account that even just breath work can be, in some ways, can be functional fitness, because the way that we breathe is super, super important in terms of rehabilitation. So all that said, every individual is different, and Jenny and I are here to provide insights, but really it'd be important to talk to you individually if that's necessary. And I know, Nicole, you actually worked with Jenny postpartum, so really awesome provider. Okay, so all that said, postpartum fitness. I have worked with women who have started their actual fitness outside of just breath work, even just 2 weeks postpartum. And then I've had others where it's like, okay, we just need to focus on breath for the next 6 weeks, 2 months, maybe 3 months before we dive even further. And it's really dependent upon the experience. But I think what's super important, I know we got some questions about this, and I know Jenny can speak to it also, is tuning into your own unique body and understanding what signs to look for to know that your body's prepared. And then even moving forward with your fitness, once you feel like, okay, I am really ready to dive back in, still being in tune and knowing that every single day we wake up as humans, specifically as females, and even more specifically as postpartum moms, having to tune in that day. So one thing that I recommend right out the gate, once you start returning to the breath, returning to fitness, is starting the day, first thing when you wake up, with some alone time, maybe not alone time, but at least intentional time on the floor, laying on your back, starting with the breath, and then moving through some semblance of flow, breath work, that's going to just help you kind of set the tone for your day and tune in. Because if we just start the day right out the gate, wake up, get to it, whether we're getting straight to a workout or we're just getting to life and motherhood and all of it, without ever tuning in, we might be kind of unintentionally, subconsciously pushing some issues to the side and not actually acknowledging them or engaging with them or addressing them. And so even prior to returning to fitness, just in general, I think starting the day with some breath work, which Jenny and I will dive more into, is a great way to set the tone to then help you move forward with, should I even work out today? Should I just do breath work? How's my body feeling? How stressed am I? Should I even be and even setting an intention with how we pick up our kids, how we hold our kids, how we do whatever work, sitting at our desk, whatever it is. I think expanding our thoughts around fitness to not just the hour we spend working out into how am I using my body to be fit, to be well, to be healthy throughout my entire day from the moment I wake up. So one thing that I really always highly recommend is starting your day with breath. Even before you get out of bed, or once you get out of bed, and maybe you wash your face, and then you lay on the floor and you take anywhere from 3 to like 30 minutes, just really tuning in, using breath work, using specific movement to kind of tune into every single body part, especially your diaphragm and your pelvic floor, and that intra-abdominal breath, and that finding that pressure, finding that stability, and seeing how you feel. Because even especially like once we get our cycles back, our body's needs can change throughout the month. And so there's just so much going on and so much change in our bodies. Have just been through something so incredible, but also traumatic. And I think that that's important to consider too, is like appreciating what our bodies have done and having so much respect and love for them, but then also acknowledging that they've been through a trauma. And we spend 9+ months growing a human, and then that baby is on the outside, and we have to really embrace the 9+, potentially even more months to kind of rehabilitate it. So I don't know if that's kind of just like an overview. I know we're going to dive more into the nuances, but I guess my like one takeaway from that is, if you can work it into your day to start your day with movement and breath, I think that's a really powerful tool to take into the postpartum and beyond, because it allows you so much important information to then carry with you throughout the rest of your day.
Awesome. Yeah, so the diaphragmatic breathing, you guys have both mentioned, and I know not everybody knows what that is or how to do it. So can we do like some sort of little demonstration of it and instruction through it? Because it's hard. I try to do it, and it's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, Laura, do you, I can run through kind of what I do, and then Laura, I know everyone kind of has different cues for this, and so maybe Laura, after I do it, maybe you have some other tips and strategies too, because I think what I found is that the end goal of a diaphragmatic breath is the same, but sometimes our routes there is different. So let me show you guys what I do. So let me move this out of the way. Okay, so I think one of the biggest things is that, especially today in our world with everything going on, we're all chest breathing, because it's our stress breath. It's our breath that we do when we're being chased by a tiger. And in many ways, there's lots of tigers out there, including our children at home sometimes. So the first step is to really get out of the chest. And that is a big win, period. But then we need to be more picky about where the breath goes once it's down, to guarantee that it's a diaphragmatic breath. So, and sometimes sometimes during these things is not the best time to feel and practice. So just like Laura said, it's like you want kind of quiet, alone time for this, because you're reprogramming something that's supposed to be like subconscious, unconscious. And so you really need to tune in and be in a relaxing environment without all the chaos going around you. And laying down kind of with your legs, like knees bent, feet flat, or supported is the best and easiest position. Sitting will be hard. Standing harder, carrying a baby, hard, even harder. Okay, so the first step is to just bring it out of the chest. So if you take one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly, and I like to just tune into where my breath is in that moment. So you can kind of get an idea for like what your subconscious level of stress is based on where your breath is. So if we're all up here, kind of, that's kind of your chest breath. It's kind of an upward lift of the rib cage and into the neck. So if you're there, you want to just bring it down to your bottom hand. So you're trying to quiet the top hand and have most of your air fill up your bottom hand. At least be the first thing that fills up, and then maybe a little lift at the end. So that's kind of your first step. Now, what I find is that a lot of people will do this, but then it's what I call a belly breath. And so a belly breath is just letting that air kind of go straight outwards. So when you're filling up, you're getting it all in that belly. Now, reasons why we like that breath better than the chest, period. But it's not a diaphragmatic breath because the diaphragm inserts into our lower six rib cage, or lower six ribs. And so in order to guarantee it's diaphragmatic, we've got to be in those lower six ribs. The reason I think it's really important in the postpartum population to kind of avoid belly breathing is because you're trying to heal from a stretched out abdomen. So the path of least resistance for your air or for your pressure is gonna be straight out the front, but that's like stretching the tissues out that are already overstretched. So it's gonna be even harder, but also really more important to not do just straight belly breathing in the postpartum, even though that's what your body is gonna want to go to. So to make it a diaphragmatic breath, once you get it down, you're gonna put your hands on your side ribs, on your lower side ribs. Your thumbs can kind of wrap around to the back. And the movement you're looking for is an outward and upward movement. So kind of like a bucket handle coming outward and then up. So you're trying to get kind of expansion into your hands. You can think about it, your rib cage as being an umbrella. You're trying to open up that whole umbrella and then close that umbrella. Now, what I find is that a lot of people are going to be in that flared up rib cage place here. And if you're flared up, you're not going to find any of that kind of to the side rib movement. So you need to make sure that your rib cage is down, nipples are on a parallel, or theoretical nipples. Things change after having a kid. And then you also want to make sure that they're not flared open. So you might have to really close that rib cage first on your exhale to then find that inhale and feel that expansion out into your hands. And it's really that into the sides expansion that we're looking for to call it a diaphragmatic breath. Laura, you have anything to add?
Just different cueing. I mean, I've used those. I think that's brilliant. But I found, like you said, just like anyone who's been involved in the fitness world, like you can say the same thing over and over to somebody, and then someone else comes in and basically says the same thing in like one word different. They're like, oh, why did you say that? I'm like, so. And what I do sometimes is I have a couple different ones. I kind of take people through like a series. So I will have people start with a forearm under the belly button and a forearm on like the low ribs, shoulder blades back, and then there, breathe in. And I like to say, like, fill your whole middle body with air. A lot of us hold the tension here, but I think what I found is like thinking of the middle as like a cylinder or a wine barrel, if you like wine like me, where it all kind of expands together. So forward, side, low back even. And so what I do is I'll say, okay, let's start with a forearm under the belly button, a forearm on the lower ribs, shoulder blades back and down, neck is long, and then breathing and trying to feel your full forearm and hands expanding. So this whole low belly is expanding, the ribs are expanding too, and you can feel that for both. And then I do give yourself a hug through here and kind of let the forearms fall on the ribs. And same thing, I think this really helps with that side, that's opening through the side. So like feeling your hands expand, and then also the ribs expanding too. And then I'll have hands on the low back, kind of in that little place where it's like above the hips, below the ribs right there. And then feel that expanding too. So typically when I'm doing this, people would be sitting like cross-legged, sitting up, or laying on the ground with the same stuff on the front, and then feeling this feedback. If you're sitting up, then with your hands, or if you're laying down, feel your back pressing into the ground. So you're kind of expanding front, sides with the obliques, and then also that low back. So then again, a breath here, and feeling that like this butt of your hand in that little like crevice that we all kind of have right there, expanding with the breath as well. So really, just like Jenny was saying, focusing on, I know for me, for a long time, when I would try and do this belly breath postpartum, it was just like you were saying. It was like I would just like pooch out just where basically Edie grew, and not also feel like the low ribs and the obliques and my back and everything expand. Sometimes people are still not fully grasping it. I'll actually have them put their hands in their armpits too. So it's like, yes, I want you to try and make your belly expand, and also feel that expansion through your armpit. And that's how we can really kind of feel this whole middle expanding together. Diaphragm's working, pelvic floor is working, and most importantly, like they are communicating, which is super powerful in and of itself as well. Yeah, so those are the I think it's the same concepts, just like touching yourself, which I know this is something to consider as well, like a few different things here. First of all, yes, we lose touch with diaphragmatic breath when we're pregnant physically, right? Because now there's actually this giant thing in there that's impacting our ability to actually physically diaphragmatically breathe. But I think there's also a lot of signaling and messaging for women from a very young age that oftentimes, myself included, create a situation where we disconnect from this super early on. Because as women, oftentimes we are told to suck in, to be tinier, to be small, especially to the middle. And so in the process of sucking in or wearing things that are like super clamping through here, that's also going to cut off the ability to breathe and have your pelvic floor and diaphragm connect. So a lot of this unlearning and learning is happening. It's unpacking stuff that we've been holding on to since we were little kids, and or like, you know, coming into adolescence and then maturing and going through puberty. Then it's like all of a sudden, oh shoot, to be, you know, appealing, I need to be tiny. And so I had to learn, like, and kind of fall in love with my body. Motherhood was huge in that for me, but then also just like learning like, hey, it's actually really powerful to have this middle that's not super like sucked in right through here. It's like my core is strong and it's relatively thick in a way that I really appreciate, and I'm learning to breathe and not spend time like sucking in so tight through my middle. So I just figured I would touch on that as well. It's like these cues are something that a lot of us are going to have to carry forth every single day, and I think there's power in touching our bodies. It can be uncomfortable, especially, I know I've worked with a lot of women post C-section who have, again, back to the trauma around like touching our bodies after surgery, or, you know, also the interesting factors of like, we carried this human and now all of a sudden they're out of us. And so working with someone might be especially important for this, but like it can be triggering, or there can be a lot of emotional release along with the like returning to this kind of proper, really, truly healthy breath. So yeah, just some thoughts.
There's like so many things that I want to be like, oh yes. That, sorry, Nicole, if you were gonna say something, but I just want to touch on a few things.
That's great.
Okay. Gosh, where do I begin? So Laura is spot on with all of it, and just like we're talking about the abdominal, referring to the abdominals right now with that kind of like chronically held in state, and that in order to function as a core, it needs to have that lengthen and expansion. The pelvic floor is exactly the same thing. And that we often hold a lot of tension in our pelvic floor. It can be very much similar to our neck, in that it's holding tension and trauma. And a lot of the times when we think of like pelvic floor trauma, we think that it needs to be sexual, or, you know, that it was rape, but not necessarily. It can be any emotional trauma whatsoever. I mean, in the yoga world with the root chakra, like the pelvic bowl holds kind of just our like energetically is our center. And so it energetically holds on to a lot of emotions. And I find that with pregnancy, in postpartum, it had trauma with that baby coming out or just holding on to it. And also just that early postpartum state is a really huge transition. We lose our identity in many ways. We feel alone in many ways. We're sleep deprived. Our hormones are crazy. And so what I often find is that the pelvic floor is held as tight as possible. And so there's this misconception that a healthy, strong pelvic floor is just Kegels, like do a Kegel, contract it all day. But really it's this letting go of the pelvic floor that is far more important, and what I find needs to be the first focus of majority of the women that I work with. And so the kind of, if you tack this onto diaphragmatic breath, we just want to ensure that in addition to going all the way around like a wine barrel, we're also going down into the pelvic floor, that air and that expansion and that letting go is going down into the pelvic floor. And with that, just like Laura kind of referred to, if you feel any emotions come up, like feel it, let it come through, because your body needs to process all of that. And breath is like a huge tool to kind of move those emotions through and feel them. And you're just going to end up in a better state, period. Let alone on a muscular level, being able to let go of your pelvic floor. It's counterintuitive, but oftentimes you'll find functional strength after letting it go. So, yeah. I could just keep ranting on so many things.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. So, I mean, what I'm hearing is like, there's a big shift in mindset that has to be had when you're postpartum, and focusing on the breath is like step one, and understanding how your pelvic floor functions and how the breath affects it, and really leaning into that before you can even really jump into any other sort of, you know, whatever your fitness regimen is. I want to talk a little bit about Kegels because I think that that's what so many of us either are told to do or just think that that's what we're supposed to do because we were told that at some point or heard that at some point. So can we just touch on that? Like do you instruct people to do Kegels? Why, when, how, like what's the deal with Kegels?
Laura, do you want me to take this one first? Yeah. Okay. So Kegels, it's not that they aren't a thing. It's not that we don't need them. Like, we need to be able to contract our pelvic floor, but we're not going to be able to contract it if we don't let go of it and relax it first. And so I guess the best way of kind of demonstrating that is looking at the biceps. So if you were to have a biceps and have a weight in your hand, in order to have full strength of that bicep and a big contraction, you're gonna need to be at a lengthened state in order to do so. If you sit around like this all day and then a demand comes is placed on you, this is the amount of contraction you have. So you barely have anything, which is a very weak contraction. And so when doing Kegels, I always say put an emphasis on letting go of it first. Start with diaphragmatic breath, feel the release, because most people are holding, and then incorporate your Kegel, but always make sure that you relax it in between them. So always pair it with like 3 to 5, either diaphragmatic relaxation, pelvic floor breaths after on your inhale, with emphasis on your inhale. Now on the exhale is when a Kegel should occur, because we kind of talked about on the exhale is when the muscles shorten and contract. And so when you are doing a Kegel, you want to make it on your exhale. And this is kind of how the body should function without us thinking about it. But in early postpartum, we're reprogramming it. So we consciously have to do this coordination of inhale, lengthen, exhale, contract. And the cues for a Kegel, in order to incorporate the whole thing, there's a front and a back to it. So we want to make sure that we're getting the front by thinking about stopping the flow of urine. Don't actually try that on the toilet because it messes up the whole reflex of peeing, but you can visualize it. So stopping the flow of urine is the front side. You can kind of feel that squeeze happen on the front. And then on the back side, it would be holding a fart in. And you can kind of feel that squeeze on the back side. They're not meant to function in isolation. They're supposed to function together. But it's nice to kind of coordinate the brain to be like, oh, there's a front side. And, oh, there's a back side too. And then when you try to do both of them, you might be a little bit more aware of which one wants to be the dominant one. I typically clinically find that the backside tends to be what wants to do all the work. And so most of the emphasis is usually on the front side. And then we want to make sure we get that third layer, that like lift layer. And so a proper Kegel has the squeeze, which is probably what you just did if you were practicing. But we need to make sure we get the lift. And so the cue for that would be, I mean, there's so many out there. Again, different cues. Each person's totally different with what works for them. But the easiest one is just kind of like you're sitting on 2 marbles, one underneath your vagina, one underneath your butthole, and you go to squeeze around them, again, on your exhale, and you lift them up about like an inch or so, up into your vagina and into your butthole. So that provides that lift, and usually there's like this little awkward Kegel face that comes with it when you're trying to find that third layer, and that third layer tends to be what is lost the most in postpartum as well, and just like totally forgotten. But again, like nothing against Kegels. We definitely need to be able to contract and have a full contraction, but always make sure that you've relaxed it first, and always pair it with relaxation breaths when you're doing it in isolation. When it comes to functional fitness, and this is kind of like, you got to do this work to recoordinate the whole system. Or if you go to lift something heavy and this system isn't recoordinated, then you will pee yourself. You will have prolapse symptoms or pain. And so you've got to kind of get all this back on board before you go into like, you know, the gym. But also we pick up a kid all day, which is a ton of lifting. And so in recoordinate it in early postpartum kind of right away, because you're picking up that kid right away unless you've had a C-section, that's when the term blow before you go comes, where you're exhaling and you're recruiting your abdominals and you're recruiting your pelvic floor, because then you know that they're on before you go to lift up your kid. And then you have a better chance of holding the kid and focusing on where your breath goes to then keep those muscles engaged on both the inhale and the exhale. So sorry, that was a little tangent off of Kegels, but Laura, do you have anything else for Kegels?
I mean, not really. I just think it's important, coming full circle back to like just seeing the proper providers and tuning into your own body, because everybody's so different. And there are a lot of people who are like super hyper toned up back down there. And like, especially in like CrossFit and like people who are lifting a lot of weight, you can be like too tight in some cases. And so really just kind of making sure you're figuring out your own unique body and not taking the blanket, like do this exact number of Kegels a day, because every person is super different.
Yeah. And as far as the lifting, that was one thing when I took the course with you, Jenny, I was, I didn't realize the breathing. So like, for example, I'd never been coached this way, but I feel like I've done CrossFit for a long time and I've always like held my breath when I lifted, and like, especially heavy. And I remember you saying like, no, you should not be doing that. And so retraining that is like especially difficult if you've been doing, you've been doing CrossFit or any kind of lifting or whatever for a long time. That's been really tough for me to like take breaths in the middle of the lifts and like breathe through them rather than like, and like bear down,
Yeah. And with that said, like, so just like we kind of touched on, intra-abdominal pressure and muscles stabilize the spine. So when we're at low weights, we should be breathing. Early postpartum, you're going to be the strongest on your exhale. As you move into, like, as you get the system recoordinated, as the tissues kind of come back to their original or close to it length, then there's a moment when we actually start becoming more stable on our inhale, because the inhale provides intra-abdominal pressure, and if the muscles are coordinated, they're kind of on in this lengthened state too. And then the strongest you're going to be is putting that intra-abdominal pressure and the muscle, so a bracing on top of that. And that's where the whole thing comes of taking a big inhale and then bracing. But it really doesn't happen until about like over like 5 rep max and more. Like that's when it needs to happen. And then when people do that, it's absolutely essential to make sure that the pressure is evenly distributed all over that wine barrel and down. What I find a lot of the times is too tight belt use, or again, like that bearing down, like chances are a lot of your pressure was going straight down through your pelvic floor instead of having that evenly distributed all the way around down pressure. So it's kind of the breath holding doesn't really need to occur until 5 rep max or higher. And that in early postpartum on an exhale is going to be your strongest. And then you'll feel the shift that actually on your inhale, you're stronger. Yeah, that all makes sense.
Super interesting. I just want to pause and ask if anybody has any questions so far. We have a smaller group than I anticipated, so I think we have the bandwidth to like have any kind of Q&A if anyone has questions yet. No? Oh.
Hi guys, I just wanted to introduce myself really quickly as my child.
Yeah.
Crawls all over me. This is Emerson. Can you say hi?
Hello.
This is really, really super helpful. Because you can see, I have an almost 1-year-old, but I am also pregnant again with my second baby, and we're due in October. And the pelvic floor has been something that I think I've struggled with. I'm currently struggling with pubic symphysis quite a bit. It came on at around 36 weeks with her, and it was like the most painful thing. It was even worse than labor for me. Like I could not move at all. And unfortunately, I feel like coming back on, so I'm starting PT actually tomorrow for it, and just hoping to tackle it hopefully sooner rather than coming on not being able to like take a step, or I mean it was horrible. Oh, she has a lot to say too apparently. Hey. So this is awesome information, everything that's being provided. Especially with like the Kegels. You hear all the time, do 50 a day, and I'm like, oh God, I did my Kegels today. I can't, it is like one of those things that's like, I forget, but it's because I'm told to do it by somebody. Okay, girlfriend. All right. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that. I just wanted to put in my little sentence.
Thank you so much, Ez. I'm happy that you're here. Congratulations. I can't believe you're going to have another one so soon. It's crazy. Good for you.
I know. Yeah. That's true. We're still processing 6 months in. I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? But
Yeah.
we're excited.
Yeah.
And we're going to wait to see what we're having. So I don't know if we're having a boy or a girl, but we're excited.
That's awesome.
So,
Good. I hope
yeah.
that you find this information helpful. I'm sorry that you're suffering from that right now.
So with pubic symphysis pain, what it tends
Thank you.
to,
I know.
Esmeralda, can you hear? You're like cutting out. Can you hear me right now, Esmeralda? Yeah. Okay, I see you. Okay. So with pubic symphysis pain, what I find is that it just signals that you overuse your groin muscles. It tends, like, again, everyone's so different, but I would say clinically what is usually the case is you overuse your groin muscles to stabilize. So our groin, our hip flexors, our low back, they can stabilize the spine when the abdominals and the pelvic floor and the diaphragm are kind of offline. And so it could be kind of how you stabilize before having a kid. And then with kind of that increase in demand on the body during pregnancy and the changes in posture and all this stuff, that's when it kind of came to the surface. And chances are good that, especially with the little time that you've had, that you haven't been able to change that stabilizing strategy. So now you're facing it again because your groin muscles are like trying to hold up your whole body basically, and they attach into the pubic symphysis and they pull really hard on it. That combined with the hormones to kind of increase the flexibility and lends to the pubic symphysis pain. So I'm sure your PT will cover it, but just releasing your groin muscles is the best immediate pain reliever. And then just don't stretch them, because if you go to stretch them, you're just going to keep pulling on the bone. So you want to just release them, get massage, do it yourself, use a tennis ball or cross ball foam roller. That's going to provide just a little bit less pull. And then when it comes to changing the system, like we've talked about, breath is absolutely essential, but posture is really, really big, that we can't have our diaphragmatic breath if we don't have the right posture. So if you're still in pregnancy posture, which we tend to be for a long time, especially holding the kids, we need to kind of bring those shoulders back over the hips again, bring the rib cage back down, untuck the tailbone because it tends to get this little tuck in the bottom. And that once you get in that alignment and you work on your breath, then usually the abdominals and the diaphragm and the pelvic floor will kind of be like, oh, I'm in a position now to help you, so that the groin can shut off. But I'm so glad that you're able to go see a PT, because that's probably exactly what you'll be working on.
Yes, I'm looking forward to not having as much pain. Like, oh my gosh, what did I do now? And of course, start working out, and the second I do something, I feel like I'm doing great, and then I'm like, okay, I'm working out and all this stuff, and then my husband's like, don't be too competitive as I walk out the door for CrossFit. I'm like, oh my gosh, just hush. But no, I'm excited that I'm gonna be getting into PT and doing good stuff. So thank you.
That might be a good segue into one of the questions that we actually got when I put this out on social media. Somebody was curious, specific to CrossFit, are there any resources you can point them to that they can share with their coaches when they return to the gym postpartum? Because I think a lot of coaches, I know that's something that you're working on, Jenny, with Mom Strong. A lot of coaches just don't know how to properly address somebody who's postpartum, whether it's like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever. Just, I know in my experience, like I was thankful that I had a lot of CrossFit under my belt, and then I was able to, like, I knew how to scale, and a lot of people have that, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people come back in with, just kind of relying on the coach, and oftentimes coaches aren't 100% sure or comfortable coaching women that are postpartum properly. So is there anything you guys can do for that?
I mean, honestly, the reason I got into being like, you know what, I'm going to just train coaches is that I was pregnant and needed to keep my back healthy and lifting has been my saving grace for that. And I just found like no one knew what to tell me. And there was kind of two different opinions you got. You got either like, just do what feels good. Like, just do what feels good. Or you got the like, don't lift over a gallon of milk, you know? And there was nothing in between and nothing that felt really tailored to like my body and what my body was going through. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about like, sometimes what feels good isn't necessarily good for you, which is hard because you're like, what measurement do I have then? If it feels good, and then I feel like I can keep doing it. But sometimes we suffer from the consequences of that in postpartum because maybe we pushed it too hard, or maybe we were just unaware. We didn't have that feedback that what we were doing. Maybe we, you know, our entire bar path changed because we kept doing cleans and we had to get the bar around the baby's belly. And then in postpartum, you're trying to undo that. And so, yeah, I have done a few like workshops and webinars now for coaches. And I have a certification for gyms to get because it's just, again, like the coaches just often don't feel comfortable, but there are a few entities out there that do really good training. So BirthFit is one of them. So if you go, I think BirthFit probably has a search engine on their website where you can go birthfit.com and you can find where there's BirthFit professionals and there's BirthFit, I think they call them trainer coaches. And then also Brianna Battles is another one. She's a trainer who is a mom herself and went through kind of a similar experience of like, there's just not enough knowledge out there. And so she has developed so much online content. It's really accessible. So you can she has programs for moms on there, and she also has programs for coaches on there. So it's really accessible in that it's all online on your own pace. And then, Laura, do you do anything for coaches or do you do for moms online?
I work primarily with women, with moms, but I would add to that list. It's great seminars, the dynamic neuromuscular stabilization courses. And those are really cool because they're specific to so many different things. So I've seen there's some that are specific to postpartum motherhood. There are some that are specific to sport, some that are specific to gymnastics, to massage therapy, to yoga. And I I've taken 3 of those, and I find them to be really beneficial across the board because yes, this stuff is important for new moms, but it's also important for all humans. We all have a pelvic floor, we all have diaphragms, and most people don't know necessarily how to breathe the best way for the best benefit for their body. So that DNS is, if you just Google DNS, it's from Prague, and I can't recommend those enough. I'm trying to hopefully take one in Colorado in November, but it's a women's specific one, but it's just a really cool seminar. And a lot of coaches and trainers are looking for CEUs to maintain credentials. And so those are really great for adding to your repertoire.
Okay. I'm going to just take note of all these different resources that we're talking about, and then I'll send like a follow-up email so that everybody can just have them. They don't get lost.
Nicole, can I add one too?
Yeah.
I think when Jenny was talking about, and Laura too, actually talking about pelvic floor function and holding on to emotions and tensions in your pelvic floor, I think a really phenomenal book that your followers might like is The Wild Feminine by Tammy Lynn Kent. It's like Tammy nodding her head.
I took Tammy's course.
Incredible.
And I
okay.
love her. She also has a book called Mothering from Your Center,
Yes.
which was the second one that she wrote after Wild Feminine, and it is specific to both pregnancy, labor and delivery, and motherhood, and it's beautiful.
Anything about her work is incredible. So I would definitely add that.
Awesome.
And then I like to actually, because I always get the question like, well, what exercises, what can I do? What can I do? And it's the big picture. It's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it. And so I like to give moms kind of a checklist to go through, to run through any exercise that they're doing to be able to answer that question, is it good for me? And the checklist is, what is my posture? So am I able to keep my rib cage down, keep my pelvis in neutral, so not tucked, not flared? And where is the weight on my feet? Needs to be the whole foot, not heels, not toes. And then where's my breath? So if I can do a diaphragmatic breath and I'm breathing, I'm not holding my breath, then those are the first two checks. And then the third is, well, what muscle is working? Do I need to kind of exaggerate my abdominals and my pelvic floor and my exhales with this? Do I feel tension in my hip flexors, my low back? Those ones are the no-goes. It's kind of core, glutes, shoulder blades. That's kind of like where you want to be. If you go through that checklist, then it's pretty likely that exercise is going to be good for you. If you find yourself where you're like, oh, I'm holding my breath and I can't, or I'm flaring my rib cage up on dumbbell unders and I can't bring it back down, it just means that the exercise is too hard. And that's when scaling comes in. So you want to make it easier for yourself. There's some exercises that are going to lend to these like good, kind of the checklist a little easier, and some are going to lend to it being harder. So like overhead work, it's harder to keep your rib cage down. So there's certain things that are going to be just naturally easier given the movement. But then when it comes to difficulty level, we're going to go into kind of these compensating strategies or hold our breath when it's too hard. So that's when you kind of dial it back, do less range of motion, do less weights, go dumbbells instead of barbell, to the point where you can do it. And if you can't get that, if you can't get your checklist and you can't make it easy enough, then it's kind of an exercise you need to give up for that time being. But our bodies change so quickly that you check in with it again to see if you're there at that point. And I think that kind of that check-in process and really checking yourself about why you're doing stuff too, I think just athletes are athletes. And so we're used to kind of pushing through stuff. We're like, no pain, no gain, or like, that's how you've identified your whole life, or you just feel like you want a piece of yourself back, or you need the endorphin. Like, you need to ask yourself why you're doing it. And sometimes our kind of ego or our mental reasons for doing it are really not good for our bodies in the long term. And so kind of having that discussion with yourself to be like, is this good for me? And if it's not, then why am I trying to do this is really important.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. The mental check-in part of it. I think Laura probably really agrees with that. That's one big thing I've taken from her approach to fitness is like, is this a good day to even do anything?
It's okay to take a break. And then, and the why, I resonate so much with the why, like always asking why. What is my why behind this? Am I doing this because am I trying to work off what I ate yesterday? Am I trying to get my body back? Am I trying to impress somebody? Am I trying to beat an old time? And why, and what's it worth, and what's the actual goal here? It's to move functionally and to take care of our bodies and to find health. And ultimately it kind of all comes back to self-care, right? Like the rehabilitation and the loving on our bodies versus, again, not to keep coming back, but like from a young age, a lot of women are taught to fight our bodies, to look a certain way, to fit a certain mold, and instead shifting the headspace around why we're working out postpartum. It's reparation, like to repair our bodies, to rehab, and then also to actually truly deeply care for ourselves. So like that self-care piece is really important. Love our bodies instead of fight them.
I have a question along these lines. So what then does it actually look like realistically to live out waking up in the morning and checking in and then planning your fitness for, based on how you're feeling? Because, as a mom with one or more kids, you have these like small windows of time, when you can work out. And for me, I'm used to having, kind of setting up a schedule for myself where like on this day, I'm going to run this many miles or, or even just always making sure that I do like 30 to 60 minutes of exercise every day. And right now, because of what's going on in my pregnancy, I can't necessarily do that. There's some days where I really have to rest, even like for 2 days in a row. And not exercise. And so like, what does it look like realistically to actually live that out? where you're not following a schedule and where you're really listening to your body, you know, and you're
Yeah,
not
I'm
going
happy to
passive.
touch on that.
Yeah.
It's been a huge learning for me. I definitely was like a chronic over-exerciser, and it was like I had to go to class, and then I had to finish class, and then I had to do extra like accessory work, and then I was there for 2 hours. And so my life now looks like I wake up a little bit before my kid, or even if I wake up with her. Since she was little, I have let her know that my moments in the morning to pause and to breathe and to take care of myself are kind of non-negotiable. I mean, obviously if she's in like a really tough state or like really struggling, there's a little bit of an echo. Jenny, I think it might be coming from your, would you mind muting real quick? I just hear myself twice. So I can't think straight. Thank you. So I guess let me start over. I think what's most important is that as moms, we oftentimes feel like we come second, third, fourth, fifth. And it's incredibly important and empowering to also sometimes put ourselves first. And so that said, a workout doesn't have to be an hour. A typical morning for me is like, I try and get up before. If I don't, then I actually feel totally fine saying, hey, I love you to death. I'm going to take the next 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes for myself. You're welcome to move with me. You're welcome to hang out. You're welcome to read a book, but like I'm going to take care of my body. And I just feel like that's such an important example for me to set for Evie. And then that's all it takes. So I'll lay on the ground for 5 to 10 minutes and I will do I have this flow and I change it depending on the day, and I'm breathing, start with breath, and then I'm moving, like kind of range of motion for every single part of my body and tuning in and feeling it. And I've kind of created this like system that I go through. It's like my check. And it's where I get to kind of meditate to start the day. And then I will literally go into something anywhere from like a 5 to 12 minute just to workout. And I used to be in this place where I'm like, I moved today. It wasn't really a workout. I just moved, but screw that. It was a workout. I moved my body. I moved a load, a kettlebell, a couple of dumbbells. That's all we have right now. Also just our body weight in general is great and it's effective. And it doesn't have to be like an hour long sweat angel on the ground, super intense workout every day. In fact, I would argue that not every human shouldn't necessarily be doing that every single day. A 60-minute workout a day is probably too much, especially when you compound that with the fact that we are lifting our children, hopefully moving our bodies a lot. And so I also think it's another shift of perspective is like, I mentioned this earlier, taking the everyday things that we do and the way that we live our life and looking at living as fitness and the functionality of like, okay, now I'm moving about my kitchen, I'm picking up my child, I'm playing, I'm squatting, I'm bear crawling as I'm chasing my daughter across the floor. All of that is fitness. All of that is functional. All of that is important. So if we can shift our minds to, instead of like compartmentalizing an hour workout a day and then life, it's like, actually, how can I take what I've learned about my body and the intuitive movement and actually utilize my fitness and improve my fitness with everything I do throughout the day, from picking up a pencil off the ground to lifting a heavy barbell. And so I'm hoping that kind of helps, like, and letting go of the, like, I'm going to plan my week out, like Monday's run day, Tuesday's this, et cetera, and truly working on the empowerment that comes from tuning into my body in the morning and then choosing my fitness based on how I feel when I check in. And maybe you're laying there and you're breathing, you're like, man, today I want to run, or like today I feel like lifting heavy, or today I need a freaking break. And listening to that, it can be very powerful. And again, using fitness to improve our day, add to our day, not as a like just check it off the list thing because somehow society has made me feel like I have to work out, and then it comes full circle again back to the why. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay.
And I hi Rebecca. I also would just say, like, everything Laura says, yes, 100%, and also like the fact that you woke up and you were like, I have to rest today. I have to rest 2 days in a row. Like that, you're doing it, you're listening to your body, you're feeling it. Where you want to check yourself is, what is your self-talk about resting for 2 days? So are you feeling guilty for resting 2 days? Are you feeling like you don't want to eat as much because you didn't work out? Are you feeling like, whenever you can work out, you're going to try to go way harder to compensate? Like that's where you want to really just take the power of the fact that you listen to your body, and that is exactly what your body needed. And listening to that is like gold star for you, period. Like that's better for you. And even on a physiological level, like let's say you went for a run or did a workout when your body needed rest, you're just putting stress hormones on an already stressed out body. And that is going to have like long-term consequences beyond anything else. And so it is literally the best thing for your body and for your health in so many ways, to listen to that. And so I do think the other thing is that early postpartum, you aren't in control over what's going to happen in your day. So again, letting go of that schedule, but also giving yourself that grace to be like, my number one job right now is to bond with my baby and make sure that baby's fed. And I'm kind of at the baby's whim for a little bit. But then really feeling when the shift happens, when that baby, and it changes for all babies, you know, it depends on the kid, when that shift happens to where you can start putting some attention onto yourself, start putting yourself first. And I think the key is recognizing when that moment happens and making sure you do it. Because I think a lot of moms get stuck in the really early postpartum, I sacrifice everything, I have to do everything for this kid, and they never get out of it. And so then moving forward, they're just, you know, I've always said that in order to be the best moms that we can, we have got to prioritize ourselves and our self-care, because in order to show up 100% for your kid, you have to show up for yourself first, period. But again, like that first 3 months or so, just depending on your kid and how much they sleep, like you can't do it for a little bit, but once you have that moment where you can, then it's really important to take that. And I think that you're doing everything right now. Is just making sure that you're giving yourself the pat on the back, the kudos, the positive talk for doing so, instead of any sort of guilt or anything. And just, you're in it for the long run. So you didn't run for 2 days because you want to have a better recovery postpartum, and you want to feel better and be stronger than you ever have before, you know, 3 years from now. So.
Awesome. That's super helpful.
I'm asking for help too. I mean, I think, you know, if you have a partner or a friend or a parent or a neighbor or someone to come over and hold your baby for 5 minutes, so you can lay on the ground and just love on your body a little bit. Even like, I think I asked for it, like the, you know, I'll never forget, like immediately postpartum, still bleeding, I would go take a cyst bath, and then I would be alone and I would lay on the bed. I've showed this on my podcast, I have no qualm sharing it, but like spread out like a puppy pee pad on my bed and just like let everything breathe and lay there like spread. And just like, that was my time to be alone. Maybe it was 5 minutes. I would nurse her and then go do that immediately, and Rusty would just hold her. And it was like, I don't know, so powerful. Something so simple was so powerful. So anyways. But
that actually leads me, sorry, that actually,
that's okay.
That leads me to my other question, which is, because you sort of talked about support people, like what is a good way to prepare, you know, partner, mom, you know, support people in supporting like better postpartum recovery? Because I actually felt some outward pressure even to like, from my mom and my mother-in-law both, to like get back into, you know, exercising quickly and stuff, because they're both kind of exercise nuts. And so, yeah. And so like I'm helping my husband learn breath work. But is there anything else that you can think of other ways that I could help, like to even like educate my support people and how to support me better this time around?
I would say, yeah, again, it comes back to why. Like, would it be easier for you to just set some boundaries? And if they talk about your body and your fitness, to be like, I'm not here for that, give me space? Or does it feel good to you to educate them? Choose the path, right, that feels better. I am a huge advocate of boundaries postpartum, boundaries during pregnancy, boundaries, period. That is not their business. Telling you to get your body back, that's how I feel about it. But if it's going to feel fulfilling and like you want to be able to educate them in those things, then maybe similar to answering the question as we did to like fitness coaches and trainers, you can send them to those places to get educated. But like, again, take this or leave this, but like, you are brand new postpartum, clearly also, you know, you're gonna be balancing a lot with another baby, and that is not on you to educate them. That is, if they really want to support you, you can say, hey, I don't feel supported, here's where you can go learn. Or, hey, I don't feel supported and I'm going to cut you off. That's how I feel, kind of like hard and fast.
I would completely agree with that. And also just like, it's not your responsibility to kind of educate them, but it is your responsibility to speak up for yourself and to define what you need and to ask for it. That is that's your responsibility. But it's not your responsibility to be like, here, read this book, or, you know, like do all these things. But I think it's really about like, what are your needs, and ask for that, or just make sure it happens. Like if your needs include boundaries, set your boundaries, have that all lined up, that this is what I need, this is happening, and feel power in that. I just saw that there was a question about a 4-month prolapse. Is it okay right now to talk about that? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So there's a question about just how to reverse like minor, I mean, they've got different degrees of prolapse with regards to how far it comes out of the opening. So the biggest thing with prolapse is that one of the things is that this tissue has been stretched out. So it's really important for this tissue to have the opportunity to kind of regain its tensile strength. So one of the biggest things is really listening to any symptoms of prolapse. So if you start feeling any of the heaviness, or you start feeling the tissue coming out, or that full tampon that isn't actually in there, then that is a sign that whether it be front side, back side, or both, that's a sign that the organ's kind of pushing in and you're still stretching out the tissue. So you want to listen to those symptoms, and as you get to know what kind of brings it on, even stop before you feel that symptom. I like to kind of think of it as a gas tank, that your body's got a gas tank, and you want to kind of keep it from going in the red zone. So you've got activities that fill it up, like lying down and breathing, like taking a nap, like eating good food, like that kind of stuff. And then you've got stuff that drains you, like carrying a baby all day and not sleeping. And then hormones are also another factor that affects the tissues from like regaining that tensile strength. So you've got to listen to the symptoms to be able to make sure that you're not just continuing to stretch out the pressure. And then the other thing is that we need to make sure not all the pressure is going down. So that's just kind of everything we've talked about with regards to getting your core back online, and making sure that you're diaphragmatically breathing and all those things, that you're just trying to make sure that you're not putting more pressure down into the pelvic floor, because again, that continues to stretch out the tissues. I hope that answered your question. If you have any more, let me know. Laura, did you have anything to say about prolapse?
Not that you didn't. You nailed it. No, far more than I do on that.
Question on there that I want to cover that specifically has to do with pelvic floor physical therapy. Where is it? Oh, so somebody, this is a woman that actually wanted to make the call, but the timing didn't work out for her. But she said, at what point would it be considered not normal to still have pelvic floor healing issues? For example, peeing when you cough, prolapse, discomfort during sex, etc., postpartum. So I think she's wondering, it sounds like maybe she's having some of these symptoms and is wondering if they will like potentially heal up on their own, and when she should seek help, which is also goes into another one of the questions, which is like, is it ever too late to go try to take care of this issue? Because some women live with it for years and years. I know when I did pelvic floor PT, there were a lot of women, I did like a group exercise class in addition to my PT, and there were a lot of women, older women in there that were menopausal, and then addressing and dealing with pelvic floor issues. That was a lot, but if you can touch on that.
Yeah, and actually that's what got me into like being interested in the pelvic floor, was all the menopausal women who were starting to have really big symptoms or chronic pain. And it was all because none of this was kind of reversed or rehabbed after their kids who are 20 now. Okay, so research shows that any pain that lasts longer than 6 weeks will typically not go away on its own, as in you're gonna need to rehab it actively. They say research shows that within 3 weeks, your incontinence should go away, or you might have it unless you rehabilitate it. Clinically, I think that those numbers are a little short, because there's so many variables that go into like the tissue healing. I think it kind of depends on how much time you give yourself to heal in the beginning, like how much support you have, how much your baby sleeps. Some women are more affected by their hormones in their healing process than others. So I think there's just like a lot of factors to put numbers on it. I would say that about 3 months. If you still have symptoms after 3 months, I would say go see a pelvic PT. If sooner is better, of course, but also it's never too late, period. It's just as we get older, we lose muscle mass. So it's harder to gain muscle mass. And then it's also like with a hormone fluctuation of menopause, it's harder to rehab, and it's harder to rehab stuff that's been ingrained and stuck for so long. But it's never too late. We work on scar tissue massage of C-sections that are 25 years old, and with a lot of success. It's just harder. So I would say never too late, sooner the better. And, you know, if you're having symptoms, I say, why would you wait? And this is where it's kind of like, the reason the 6-week visit exists is that normal tissue healing occurs in 6 to 8 weeks. And so that's what surrounds that 6-week mom visit. But nothing is normal in postpartum with regard to the ability of tissues to heal. So they're actually starting to recommend 3 weeks, which is awesome. A little bit more emphasis on mom early on. And I would say if you're having symptoms, just go if you have insurance and you can, just go get it checked out. If you've got the capacity to do it, just go. Because even when you're asymptomatic, so no symptoms, it doesn't mean that everything's on board. It does not mean that everything's 100%. It means that you're below the threshold of symptoms. And that if moving forward, maybe you have another kid, or when you're perimenopausal, or, you know, any increase in demand on the system later on, it's going to come to the surface and tell you about it. So I would just encourage, if you can, if insurance isn't your thing that you're preventing you from doing so, then I would just go do it. And I know there was another question about like, how do you find a pelvic PT? Technically, you only need like 1 weekend of education as a physical therapist to become a pelvic PT. So just saying that, every person that says they're a pelvic PT is a little different. The highest level of pelvic PTs have a certification, like letters after their name. I am not one of them. There's a WCS, which is a women's health certified specialist. And then there's also like a it's like pelvic rehab certified specialist, so PRCS as well. The training entities are Herman and Wallace and the APTA Health, Pelvic Health. They just changed their name. They used to be Women's Health and Other Pelvic Health. And those have search engines on them. There's a few other search engines like Pelvic Guru that can just show you where pelvic PTs are, but then either looking for those letters after the names that they are certified, that's really high level, or when you call to ask, just saying like, how many courses has this person taken? How many years have they practiced? And then make sure that they do internal work. Some do not do the internal work. And even if you don't want internal work, it's always good to have someone who has it as an option or tool that they use, just in case it is indicated for you. So kind of asking if you do internal, how many courses, how many years. I mean, years experience is always, you know, can kind of offset any lack of education too, so.
Great. I want to touch on diastasis recti, because I know that's a big one for a lot of people. I don't know, does everybody get that? What do you do about it? How is it affected by the pelvic floor?
I can touch on it real quick because then I'm going to have to sign off for the next endeavor of the day. But I was born, this isn't as uncommon as I originally thought. I was born with 3 abdominal hernias. So this has been something that I've had to kind of like consider for a lot of my life, but didn't really, I think, in time. Of course, there's always time to repair and to be more in tune. But I think, you know, obviously with pregnancy, they got a little worse. I actually have a Teflon netting across my abdomen to kind of keep for lack of, I guess, to make this not really scientific verbiage, just to keep the guts in. So I can kind of relate on some level, but then also like, I know that my situation is a little bit different. But I think that something that we don't talk about enough, and I just kind of want to like start this conversation before I leave by just saying that this is something that is very, very, very common, and we don't talk about it enough. The words are not very, they're not commonly heard. Most coaches won't even know what you're talking about. And so just, I think, getting more comfortable with these conversations and viewing the separation of our abdomen, which is going to happen with every pregnancy, as something that is normal, and not to be, it doesn't mean in some way that you failed, you didn't like pregnancy hard enough, or you didn't take good enough care of yourself. It's just something to be aware of and use as information moving forward in the way that, again, in the ways that we move our body. And it's not going to like derail you for life. You're still going to be able to get your fitness back. You're still going to be able to be really strong. You are really strong right now. So I think it's either like no one knows what it is and they're like, yeah, this is just a thing that happens, like this is my body now, whatever. Or on the other side, there can be like almost like too much caution, and like all of a sudden I feel like I'm broken and I can't do anything, and I can't get back to fitness till I have this fully back together again. So that's kind of what I want to preface with, but I know Jenny has a lot to speak to this because this is her very incredible profession. So I'll let you go now.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge. I appreciate
Of course. Thank you for putting this together. I wish you didn't have to go. It's so fun to see your faces, everybody, and thank you for being here. And also, I'm sure Nicole will share emails, but feel free to reach out to me in any Instagram, email, whatever it is. I'm here to help and support however I can. I'm so grateful for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Jenny, you're brilliant.
You too, Laura.
Bye.
So I guess more about diastasis recti. I completely agree that there's like either you've never heard about it, you have no idea, or there's like a lot of fear base around it. Really big picture, it happens to everyone. What is it? It's the split down the middle is the easiest way to you know, common language, but what the linea alba is a line that goes down our the center of our stomach. It is like the center of this 8-pack, six pack, if any pack that you have. And it's basically just tissue. So it's just tissue where all of our abdominals come and insert into. And so when the belly needs to expand to provide room for a baby, that is where we're going to get expansion, because it's tissue, it's just connective tissue. And so you're going to have a split down the middle, period. You're going to have it early postpartum, period. The significance of it is that it's where all the abdominals attach to. So if you don't have like a strong something for those abdominals to pull off of, then your abdominals can't work. So if the linea alba, if the kind of diastasis recti doesn't repair and regain that tensile strength, then your abdominals have nothing to leverage off of. And so it can be really problematic for both the function of your core and your pelvic floor and pain and all the things. I think the biggest thing for it is rest in the beginning. Just like we kind of talked about with prolapse, having rest in the beginning is key because it lets all of those tissues come back together and regain that tensile strength. There's kind of two parts to a diastasis recti. There's how wide it is, but then there's how much tensile strength is there, how much tension is actually in that line. So aesthetically, what it looks like, we want it to be narrower just because we want our stomachs to look, you know, flatter or better or whatever the words you'd use. But functionally, it's actually that tensile strength that matters the most. And so rest is really important in the beginning, just to keep pressing on those tissues, stretching them out, letting them come back together. And then moving forward, it's all about finding the abdominals again. So the transverse abdominis is the muscle that kind of wraps around like a corset. That is the most important for stabilizing the spine. And it also kind of contributes to that tension. And so signs that you're using your transverse abdominis would be that when you go to do an exercise, there's no pressure coming out the center. So there's kind of that dome that you guys probably saw in late stage pregnancy, or a tent, people, or an alien, it can kind of look like. But that's what you want to avoid, because that's telling you that you are not controlling pressure from coming out through the middle. And so you want to recruit your abdominals to be able to minimize it, make the exercise easier, or ditch the exercise if you can't make it enough. And the cue for finding the muscle that kind of regains the tension, there's kind of a top and a bottom to it. We need to, do I have time to do this? Yeah, I do, kind of. Okay, so there's a top and a bottom to this muscle. And so the top part, I kind of mentioned the little, like closing the umbrella, the narrowing of the top of the wrist. So this is the muscle that does this. So it sits parallel to the spine, or perpendicular to the spine. So it's kind of this way. and it's deep. So the top of this muscle brings the two sides of your rib cage together and down. So when you are getting it, again, on your exhale, you're going to have these 2 points go from your, like, maybe flared up to coming down and together. And then the bottom portion of it is finding tension in this. Like, if you take your fingers to the inside of your two front hip bones and you push it deep, because it's a deep muscle, that's the muscle you want. You want tension there. A lot of people will push outward to get tension there, but again, we're not trying to generate more pressure. We're not trying to put pressure into the pelvic floor or into our abdomen. So we want it to be kind of in this drawing way, corset kind of effect. So on your exhale, you're exaggerating your exhale. You're bringing your rib cage down and together from the top, and then you're bringing your belly button toward your spine and getting tension in here. So it's not sucking it in to bring your belly button there. It's kind of like blowing out 100 candles to find tension in that muscle with the drawing in of the belly, while getting your rib cage down. And that is the muscle that's absolutely essential in order to control that pressure from coming out into the diastasis recti. And it's also the muscle that goes offline the most in pregnancy. So it's the kind of that abdominal muscle and the pelvic floor, what you want to exaggerate on that exhale. And they come on board. You don't have to consciously think about it like your whole life, but definitely early on in the beginning. Is there any other questions about diastasis recti specifically?
Jenny, do you think, so I'm 20 months, I think 19 or 20 months postpartum. I've still got a small separation above my belly button and also pelvic floor dysfunction. I've noticed improvement in my posture really needs to happen. I'm focusing a lot more on breath work. To be honest, I truly feel like some of these symptoms actually have gotten worse the longer postpartum I have gotten. And so when I took a big look at, like, okay, what's going on? I think it's related to posture. I think my question for you is, I've heard that you may always have a small separation. It doesn't mean that you have a weak core necessarily, but also that diastasis and pelvic floor dysfunction are related. And so if you're trying to heal, not pee when you cough or sneeze, do you think that, I don't know. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Do you still pee with cough and sneezing specifically? Yeah. Is that the only thing that you pee with?
Well, I haven't tried running.
Okay.
I am not now. If I do a jump squat, no.
Okay.
Jump, no.
Okay.
But I have honestly not felt comfortable with jostling. I just don't think it's a good idea. So I'll do minimal, burpees or what. I'm not I'm more about functional movement. So I'm not really doing a whole lot of crazy stuff.
Okay. So there's a few things. Yes, you can always have, you may always have a split. Normal is 2 fingers. So, what I see often is that you may have what I call a functional split. So when you're not engaging your abdominals correctly, then you don't have that tension, and maybe it's wider than 2 fingers. But if you actively engage, then you can reduce it and you can gain tension. And I think that state can definitely be lifelong, but functionally, that's fine. You're not gonna really be aware of that functionally. Because when you activate correctly, it's not there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that the posture bit, if you have an undone posture, like Laura kind of mentioned the whole thing of looking at your day as your fitness instead of your 1 hour. And I say this with every single one of my patients, that I'm actually I tend to not give a 10, 30-minute home exercise program. I give stuff you do all day, because that is where we make our gains. If we're re-coordinating something, if you wanted to learn an instrument, Like, how long is it going to take to learn it if you practice 5 minutes per day? It's going to take forever. And so it's really that commitment to all day that makes these changes. And also with regards to that gas tank, like if you're only doing these things correctly for 30 minutes of your day, and then you're still lifting that baby up and doing all the things and you're moving, like you're gonna still have prolapse, you're gonna still have diastasis recti,
Right.
you're gonna still pee yourself, because it's just, you know, it's the rest of the day that matters, period. And so with that said, oftentimes posture is one of the hardest things, but one of the most essential things.
That was so crazy is what I realized what it was walking the stroller. I walk every day for probably 3 miles, pushing that Bob stroller, and I realize I am rounding my shoulders, anterior tilt in my pelvis. This is not, like for an hour every day. What the hell am I doing? So yeah, it's like,
and that's huge. Because it changes the length of all these muscles, and it changes the coordination of your breath, and it just derails the whole system. So I definitely think that that's probably where I think you're spot on, like, oh, this is where I need to focus. The other thing,
tell me that it can be reversed.
oh yes, it just takes a lot of work. This is work, and it's not good timing in the fact that we have these little demanding children too. Like it's work, and chances are good you're undoing stuff from before kids too. So having that mindset of like, I'm trying to, but the coolest part is that once you get it, that work is going to pay off for the rest of your life. Like you're going to be stronger, feel better than you ever did pre-pregnancy. Pregnancy and having a kid is this athletic event that really brings any vulnerability to the surface. So just like I was saying with Esmeralda, it's like you probably stabilized through your groin prior to this, but having these kids brought it to the surface, and now you're forced to deal with it. And moving forward, you're going to be able to squat more than you ever did, you know? So it's just putting this work in. So posture is really, really important. And then when it comes to coughing and sneezing specifically, what I find is that sometimes we have to change the strategy of a cough or a sneeze. So the next time you do it, be aware of where your pressure is going. Coughs and sneezes are meant to expel stuff up and out. But what I find is a lot of people, it's the pressure goes straight down to the pelvic floor. And so we need to rewire that, where that's going in the first place, because like we just can't ask the pelvic floor to do all of that. And it's also not an effective cough if you are not expelling. And then the other thing is there's a reflex that's supposed to happen where when we cough, we're supposed to have this preemptive contraction of our pelvic floor, and in pregnancy that's completely derailed. So sometimes we also have to bring that reflex back. So the next time you cough or sneeze, do a Kegel right before.
Okay.
Like just see if you can get a little Kegel in there, because you're trying to just get it back on board. I'd say like 90% of my postpartum mamas, the reflex is gone and they bulge like crazy. There is no contraction. So between those two things, where's the pressure going? And then try to reprogram that reflex. That might help with just the cough and sneeze pee.
Yeah. And can I ask one more question or get you to, do we have time?
Nicole, how are you doing? How far away are your kids? Oh,
we never have enough time. I swear. I always plan for an hour, and then this time I planned for an hour and a half, and it's always, I think I need to just say like, hey, be here from like 4 to 6 hours.
I know, right?
I do have to run because I've got to go pick my kids up from school, but I'm happy to like leave this computer open.
I can answer one more question. I too have to go like wake my kid up so she sleeps tonight, but I've got a few minutes if you're cool with that. So I'll just end the, if you'll just leave and I'll end the meeting for everyone.
Yeah, everyone can leave the meeting. Okay. I don't know if you can end it or not because I'm the host, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay. Recording, and then I'll just trim the recording. Okay. So
thank you so much for doing this, Nicole.
Yeah,
thank you, Nicole.
Thank you guys. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm so stoked. I hope that you got a lot of information, and I will follow up with an email with all of the sources that we talked about, all the resources, as well with Laura and Jenny on the email so that you guys can follow up with any other questions that like come up. I know that they're always really willing to talk about this stuff. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of your day, and yeah, keep it going. I like that you're going to keep going.
Thanks, Nicole. Have a good one.
Bye.
Okay, Claire, what's your question?
So what I was going to say was, I feel like when people are pregnant, they are often told, don't do twists, don't engage your abdominal muscles, don't do anything where your core is engaged, which is completely bogus. So you spend 9 months not using your core because you're afraid to do that. And everything just sort of gets like fused together or extremely weak. And I was wondering if you would just say something to put people at ease about how to safely twist, engage your core, so that we don't spend all this time losing this muscle that we need, you know, postpartum.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm hoping we're slowly getting better with all of this. I think like pelvic PT is still a very new thing in America, and I think that we're learning a lot more about pregnancy and postpartum. And so I'm hoping that some of these things and bad advice just kind of trickle out. But yes, so first of all, I think twisting and using your abdominals with a kid is encouraged. I encourage mamas to do so, because just like you said, avoidance is not good for getting it back. But then what I find a lot of people have a lot of fear around is doing like a sit-up after having a kid. Like, I'm never going to do sit-ups again. I'm never going to do the core, or I'm never going to rotate again. And it comes back to the whole, like, it's not what you do, it's how. So the reason that sit-ups and twisting has been eliminated is because for some doctors, that's just the easier route. They're vulnerable things that can typically be done wrong. And so they've just decided, like, just don't do it. Instead of like, oh, actually you can do it right. If that makes sense. So the biggest, I mean, it's everything we just talked about. It's like, if you can do, so sit-ups specifically don't strengthen the transverse abdominis, because the transverse abdominis does not move the spine. It's like that corset. It doesn't move the spine, which is why we like it for stabilizing. It's why it's the best stabilizer. So doing a crunch is actually like a rectus abdominis strength exercise, but we also want all of our abdominals to be strong, period. And we get, you know, I definitely think like rolling to the side and pushing yourself up out of bed is like the better option, especially in postpartum, and like kind of in general, because of the amount of pressure you take just leveraging yourself out of bed. But like, we should be able to do that. So the important thing is that before you go to do a crunch, you're recruiting that transverse abdominis so that your pressure doesn't go straight out your middle. So it's all about kind of like doing it the right way, and that your signs for it not being the right way are going to be any tenting, any pain, like any symptoms. And then that's when you check yourself. What is my posture? What is my breath? What muscles am I using? Does that make sense? So it's kind of, it's unfortunate when they just like, because it's less complicated, they just kind of eliminate these things. Okay, so I think, should we wrap this up, guys?